welcome to Dorian's Mode. I am your host, Dorian Wallace, a composer, a pianist, a music therapist, and a left-wing shit-talker who enjoys rambling about BS and conversing with my fellow human beings about creativity, music, philosophy, politics, and other topics in a casual, honest, and constructive way. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about fascism. Specifically in defining fascism. And this is a particularly important subject matter for me, mostly because, I'll do it this way. On a personal note, and then also on a more communal perspective, but a personal perspective and a communal perspective, it goes like this. I had the realization during the 2016 election, with the election of Donald Trump, that white nationalism was becoming more and more socially acceptable, to say the quiet part out loud. It had always been there. It had been there for a long time, but in, we'll say, post-World War II, really post-1970s and the Nixon era, it became less socially appropriate to say blatantly racist things. But it had been there for a long time, and anyways, I witnessed friends and family begin to shift in a much more fascistic way. And not only was it a confusing experience to witness people whom I love and whom I respect fall into these fascist ideals, but it was also an eye-opener that I personally realized that had I been 10 years younger, with the Donald Trump phenomenon, I easily could have fallen into the alt-right pipeline. Came from the more economic conservative libertarian mindset, and really had the principle of free speech as at the center of my thinking, which in and of itself is not an issue. However, this creates a space that is safe for fascism to grow. And so that's the personal perspective. But then on a communal perspective, just really coming to terms with that fascism, in my eyes, is very much a societal illness. It is something that like any other chronic illness, it lives and it moves through, and we're really working on how to process through it. The goal is to cure it and to really get rid of the ideology entirely. However, we're not there yet. And and then I'm going to flip it to not only the personal perspective and the communal perspective, but also a therapeutic perspective, which is one area that I'm particularly interested in as a music therapist is exit counseling, specifically exit counseling for people involved in hate groups. And one thing I want to say, just to clarify everything right up front, is that I know where I stand on the political side of things. And if a civil war, for instance, were to break out, or some kind of major conflict, I know which side I am on. I know which side I would be fighting for. I know who I would perceive to be the enemy in that kind of a conflict. However, until we get to that point, or if we get to that point, I am very much in the mindset of being as preemptive as possible and really holistically addressing this sort of ideological issue at its root cause and attempting to keep it from spreading. So those are just some baseline perspectives, but I'm going to first give the way that I perceive fascism as a really simplistic definition. The way that I define fascism is an extreme or radical perspective of traditionalism with a heavy emphasis on a mythological past, as well as a clearly defined yet simultaneously abstract enemy. So that's how I think about it. It's really a radical form of traditionalism with a heavy emphasis on a mythological past, with a clearly defined yet abstract enemy. Consider the Donald Trump regime. Now, I am not a person who is going to simply write someone off and call them a fascist. I'm not going to do that. It's not something I feel comfortable with, and I think that there are lines in which somebody may be fascistic or leaning towards fascism without necessarily crossing the line of becoming a capital F fascist. But just to get the elephant in the room, if you were to ask me if I consider Donald Trump to be a fascist and or his supporters, my answer would be yes. It is a fascist way of processing through the world, of navigating through the world. Now, I do not consider Donald Trump to be an intellectual ideologue, meaning that I don't consider him an intellectual the way that maybe Julius Evola or Benito Mussolini or even Francisco Franco might be. So I don't consider him an ideologue, but that's not really the point. The point is that by looking at his actual actions and his material impact on the world, it is fascistic. It is a very, very radical form of traditionalism. And with Donald Trump, yes, it's not the traditional conservative that we may be thinking about, but he is very connected to the concept of hierarchy, winners and losers. He is very connected to the concept of power in a capitalist sense. He's an expert at branding and marketing. You know, when people talk about him being a businessman, being a shitty businessman, it's like, yeah, I think he fucking knows that he's a bad businessman. That's not the point. Point is, he doesn't own most of his properties. He owns the licensure of his name. He is a brand. So businesses can fail under the Trump dynasty and he won't be affected. And he can continue to sell his brand. And his brand is that he is a place in which wealthy people and powerful people congregate together. So anyways, yes, I consider Donald Trump to be a fascist. I think it was up in the air from a lot of fascist scholars, such as Robert Paxton. A lot of people were considering him a right-wing populist or a right-wing authoritarian, but not a fascist. But after January 6th, a lot of fascist scholars began to go, okay, he's a fascist. He's done it. He's crossed the line now. So ideologically, I don't think he is necessarily a fascist, but in a tangible and material perspective, he is very fascistic. Very, very connected to the concept of an organized or structured hierarchy in which he is at the top. He is the dear leader, as well as a clearly defined yet abstract enemy. And, this is often in the form of immigrants, especially brown immigrants, as well as his weird push for, declaring Antifa to be a terrorist organization, which is frankly a silly thing to say, but he's really putting it out there. So I'm going to get into a couple of definitions. The first one is Robert Paxton. And Robert Paxton wrote a really, really, really great book called The Anatomy of Fascism. And it's one that really helped me understand a more historical, materialist perspective of fascism. So he says, it is a form of political behavior marked by obsessive preoccupation with community decline, humiliation, or victimhood, and by compensatory cults of unity, energy, and purity, in which a mass-based party of committed nationalist militants working in uneasy but effective collaboration with traditional elites abandons democratic liberties and pursues with preemptive violence and without ethical or legal restraints goals of internal cleansing and external expansion. He also adds that in fascism's foundations there lies a set of mobilizing passions. So really getting people amped up. This can be really perceived well if you look at a Trump supporter, for instance. There was a rally that Ron DeSantis was holding in Florida, where the number one issue amongst the people at this particular event was immigration. The undocumented immigrants. They call it illegal immigrants, but their biggest fear was undocumented immigration. And if we were to look, here, I'll pull it up right now. If we were to look at the impact of undocumented immigrants on the economy and or the culture, as well as maybe violence, but here, so what this says is research shows that undocumented immigrants increase the size of the United States economy and contribute to economic growth. They enhance the welfare of natives, contribute more in tax revenues, and they reduce American firms' incentives to offshore jobs and import foreign produced goods, and benefit consumers by reducing the prices of goods and services. So that is from the Congressional Budget Office in an article called "The Impact of Unauthorized Immigrants on the Budget of State and Local Governments." So there is a fear that undocumented immigrants are negatively affecting the economic growth of the country, the United States. And this is blatantly false. To get a little bit deeper, there are a couple of local spaces in which the economy is affected negatively by undocumented immigrants. But aside from that, on the federal level, on the state level, and on most local levels, undocumented immigrants actually create why can't I talk? They actually create a more robust economic growth. And so right off the bat, it's not an economic reason for not wanting undocumented immigrants. Let's look up, and I'm just going to do a quick search. Let's do violence. So, the impact of undocumented immigrants and violence. Okay, so just right here, I am pulling up. This is from the International Journal of Intercultural Relations. Research suggests that people tend to overestimate the relationship between immigration and criminality, and that the media tends to erroneously depict immigrants as particularly crime-prone. The academic literature provides mixed findings for the relationships between immigration and crime worldwide, but finds for the United States in particular that immigration either has no impact on the crime rate or that it reduces the crime rate. A meta-analysis of 51 studies, and this is from the Annual Review of Criminology, but a meta-analysis of 51 studies from 1994 to 2014 on the relationship between immigration and crime found that overall immigration reduces crime, but the relationship is still very weak. So again, this is one of those things where undocumented immigrants in the United States are not negatively impacting the economy, and they are not negatively impacting the growth of crime. So again, there are people in Donald Trump's base who are completely terrified of undocumented immigrants entering the United States. And just on a brief overview, immigrants are not having a bad effect on economic growth, and they are causing very little to no crime. In fact, let's just look at this. Okay, so immigration to the United States and crime. Entering the United States without documented permission from the United States government is a crime. According to some empirical evidence that disregarded illegal immigration as a crime, immigrants, including illegal immigrants, were otherwise less likely to commit crimes than native-born citizens in the United States. A 2018 study found that undocumented immigration to the United States did not increase violent crime rates. A 2017 study found that increased undocumented immigration was significantly associated with reductions in drug arrests, drug overdose deaths, and DUI arrests, net of other factors. A 2017 study found that California's extension of driver's licenses to unauthorized immigrants did not increase the total number of accidents or the occurrence of fatal accidents, but it did reduce the likelihood of hit-and-run accidents, thereby improving traffic safety and reducing costs for California drivers. Providing unauthorized immigrants with access to driver's licenses can create positive externalities for the communities in which they live. And this is from an article from the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, which is on providing driver's license to unauthorized immigrants in California improves traffic safety. So again, I'm not here to really argue all the specifics about data, but the point is that just right off the bat, if you search, and I'm using DuckDuckGo, and I'm literally writing these topics down, so this isn't even Google or any of that shit. But I'm just DuckDuckGoing the impact of undocumented immigrants on the economy and the impact of undocumented immigrants on violent crime, or crime in general. And the first things that appear is that immigrants are not impacting either of these areas in any significant way, and in fact are creating improved spaces. So this last part I'm going to just point out, just in regards to this, is that so if immigrants, undocumented immigrants, are having very little to no impact on the economy and very little to no impact on violent crime, then what's the problem? Is it a cultural thing? Well, so this one I'm not even going to Google or DuckDuckGo, which is the real search engine I'm actually using. But I'm going to make a giant and wild assumption that a lot of immigrants that come here tend to be religious. They tend to be Catholic or Anglican. They tend to be very conservative in a lot of their social views. And this is an assumption, and I would love to be proven wrong. But the point I'm trying to make is that the Trump era has brought this topic, this issue, to the front fold. If you look at, any of the far right commentators on their Twitter accounts, this is something that gets posted about on a daily basis. Matt Gaetz talks about it. Lauren Southern talks about it. Tony, what is her name? Hold on, y'all. Twitter. Yeah, here. I'm just gonna pull up a tweet just so you can actually hear this. Oh, come on. Of course my internet's via. Oh, Tammy, that's who I'm thinking of. Wait, really? Tommy Lauren. Sorry, yes. Okay, Tommy Lauren. So I'm just pulling up Tommy Lauren's Twitter account. And, okay, of course, she's got some stuff about Hillary Clinton. Okay, yes, she's got some anti-vax stuff. Okay, so she writes just 5 hours ago. So Kroger is now discriminating against its unvaccinated employees, which is illegal here in Tennessee. Okay, sorry, I just saw illegal and misread that. Okay, wow, so she went on a tirade today about vaccines. Okay, cool. So December 15th, I'm recording this on December 17th. She writes, if the Biden administration is going to allow our nation to be invaded by hundreds of thousands of illegals per month, any governor worth his or her salt will follow in Ron DeSantis' lead and take matters into their own hands. We will discuss next on Outnumbered FNC, which is a stupid motherfucking Fox show. Today's maybe not the best. Okay, do folks have to be masked up in de Blasio's drug safe spaces while they shoot up heroin and other illicit drugs? California is hemorrhaging residents. You're right, though. Masks are small potatoes compared to the rampant homelessness, lawlessness, unaffordable housing, maintains on regulations, rolling blackouts, sanctuary for illegals, gas tax, voter fraud, and last but not least, your slimy governor. That was in response to Christian Lang. So yeah, just pointing this out. Unlike Democrat leaders who have dedicated themselves to the needs of illegals, aka future voters, Governor DeSantis is fighting for Americans and legal immigrants and won't allow Biden to continue to dump thousands of illegals into his state. So this is just, me kind of scrolling through Tommy Lauren, the far-right commentator on Fox News. This is just on her Twitter. This is part of the whole fascist concept of having a very clearly defined enemy, but it's still abstract. Who are these undocumented immigrants that they're coming across all the time? The thing is that they don't really exist. It's fear tactics. This is literally fear tactics. So I'm also going to read another historian and political scientist. This is Roger Griffin. And Roger Griffin has written numerous books on political and religious fanaticism. So he says, fascism is best defined as a revolutionary form of nationalism, one that sets out to be a political, social, and ethical revolution, welding the people, in quotes, into a dynamic national community under new elites infused with heroic values. The core myth that inspires this project is that only a populous, trans-class movement of purifying, cathartic national rebirth can stem the tide of decadence. Another thing he writes here is fascism is a generally revolutionary trans-class form of anti-liberal and, in the last analysis, anti-conservative nationalism. As such, it is an ideology deeply bound up with modernization and modernity, one which has assumed a considerable variety of external forms to adapt itself to the particular historical and national context in which it appears, and has drawn a wide range of cultural and intellectual currents, both left and right, anti-modern and pro-modern, to articulate itself as a body of ideas, slogans, and doctrine. In the interwar period, it has manifested itself primarily in the form of an elite-led armed party which attempted, mostly unsuccessfully, to generate a populist mass movement through the liturgical style of politics and program of radical policies which promised to overcome a threat posed by international socialism, to end the degeneration affecting the nation under liberalism, and to bring about a radical renewal of its social, political, and cultural life as part of what was widely imagined to be the new era being inaugurated in Western civilization. The core mobilizing myth of fascism, which conditions its ideology, propaganda, style of politics, and actions, is the vision of the nation's imminent rebirth from decadence. So, again, it's a lot of fear-mongering about the scary socialists that are trying to take over, about the problems with liberalism. The mobilization of mythology and the fear of the destruction of Western civilization. So these are just a couple of baseline definitions. The last area I'd like to just get into for, regarding a definition of fascism is Umberto Eco, who is a really great theorist and author. And he wrote a list in his essay called Fascism, which is 14 general properties of fascist ideology. I actually wrote a blog a few years ago just on this to see how many of these Donald Trump checks off. And I know this seems like a preoccupation with the Trump administration, for those of you that may be bothered by me talking about it this way, but the point is that this is an actual ideological space that is being put into global conversation and dialogue by a particular man who is particularly frightening and has a particular amount of power in the midst of a global pandemic. He's not even president. He lost the election, and he will not give up that it was stolen. He has this entire sort of decentralized QAnon movement that is behind him. There are the Proud Boys who support him. The alt-right supports him. A lot of more blatant neo-Nazis and National Socialists and even more, I'll say, traditional fascists like the American black shirts. But they all support him. And this should be taken seriously. And I would actually much rather be on the side of history in which I can apologize for overreacting, as opposed to underwriting it and saying, well, he's not really a fascist because such and such. Just to put it out this way, I literally live in this world. I read fascist literature almost every day. I explore fascist websites, and from my perspective, this is a fascist movement, and it's a particularly dangerous one because it's hidden in it's not as blatantly fascistic as some of the earlier forms of it. But so here's Umberto Eco's Fascism, the 14 general properties. So the first is the cult of tradition, which is characterized by cultural syncretism syncretism, even at the risk of internal contradiction. When all truth has already been revealed by tradition, no new learning can occur, only further interpretation and refinement. This is QAnon. This is what's happening within the QAnon world. It is constant interpretation and refinement of something that is just not true. So the second property, the rejection of modernism, which views the rationalistic development of the Western culture since the Enlightenment as a descent into depravity. So Eco distinguishes this from a rejection of superficial technological advancement, as many fascist regimes cite their industrial potency as proof of the vitality of their system. I would put into there is a gigantic fear of liberalism right now on the right. And so I'm a socialist. Like I'm a leftist person. I'm anti-capitalist in the way I view the world. And there are 5 socialists in the major Democratic Party. 6, I guess, if you want to count Elizabeth Warren. But there's the Squad, there's Bernie Sanders, and then there's Elizabeth Warren. Aside from that group, it is center-right liberals. So these are pro-capitalist, slightly socially progressive individuals. Nancy Pelosi is a hardcore capitalist. Bill Clinton is a hardcore capitalist. But the point is that liberalism really grew out of the Enlightenment. And part of the tenets of liberalism, one of the core values is freedom of speech and freedom of the press. And these are not healthy for a fascist ideology. So there is a gigantic misinformation campaign to really associate liberalism with socialism, which is absurd if you're aware of what either of these places are. And to be upfront, like I am liberal in some of my views. I mean, the way that I do this podcast is probably very, very liberal, to be honest. But at the end of the day, somebody like Joe Biden does not share the same values that I share, and so this is just one area. Another space that really grew out of the Enlightenment thought is the idea of feminism, or even critical race theory. These boogeyman terms that the far right is very scared of. So the third property is the cult of action for action's sake, which dictates that action is of value in itself and should be taken without intellectual reflection. This, says Eco, is connected with anti-intellectualism and irrationalism, and often manifests in attacks on modern culture and science. The anti-vax movement. This is the anti-vax movement. This is QAnon. This was signaled when Donald Trump said he loves the uneducated. And, I'll say to the untrained ear or the untrained eye, like, yeah, sure, he's talking to a particular sect of people. But the thing that's so dark about it is, first and foremost, it's really insulting to assume that people in the working class are not educated or are lacking an intellect or intellectual prowess. It's a really insulting thing to assume. But the other part is that there is an encouragement of anti-intellectualism so that things are not questioned, or the questions are really repeats of things that have already been said. Okay, number 4. Disagreement is treason. Fascism devalues intellectual discourses and critical reasoning as barriers to action, as well as out of fear that such analysis will expose the contradictions embodied in a synchronistic faith. There are so many insane memes right now about General Milley, and just him having the audacity to basically call Matt Gaetz out and say, listen, like, we should know what critical race theory is. Like, we should know what it is. If we're gonna study these things, we should know. I want to know what white rage is. I want to know why people broke into the Capitol on January 6th. And how many people are now calling, this, I don't know, he's had to have been in at least 30 years, possibly 40 years, but how many people are calling him saying it's treasonous to have these views? It's ridiculous. So property number 5, fear of difference, which fascism seeks to exploit and exacerbate, often in the form of race or an appeal against foreigners and immigrants. I'll also add the extreme amount of bigotry that is thrown around against trans people. It is so unreal how disturbing, how quick people are willing to just demand execution or declare a mental illness of people who are trans. And yeah, sorry, I'm just realizing how much this actually frustrates me. But it's fucking gross. It's fucking gross. Property number 6, appeal to a frustrated middle class, fearing economic pressure from the demands and aspirations of lower social groups. January 6th was not lower income folks. I wish I had a podcast back when this all happened, because you can search my Facebook feed if you must, but just to I was calling out that this was not lower class people storming the Capitol. I was pointing out that it was petite bourgeois, and I was pointing this out on January 6th. These are people who could take off during the work week and travel to DC with all their gear and their flags. And anyways, as we had, I know it sounds like I'm saying I said that, but there is evidence on my social media feed, and I wish I had been recording this podcast back then, a year ago, because if you understand fascism and you understand how to analyze this stuff, it's about the petite bourgeois, which is the middle class, or the frustrated middle class. So property number 7, the obsession with a plot. So it's the hyping up of an enemy threat. This often combines with an appeal to xenophobia, with a fear of disloyalty and sabotage from marginalized groups living within society. So what it says here is, such as the German elite's fear of the 1930s Jewish populist businesses and well-doings. So Echo cites Pat Robertson's book, The New World Order, as a prominent example of a plot obsession. the QAnon movement is obsessed with a plot taking place. That, yeah, I mean, that is the QAnon movement. It is an obsession with a plot. And I'm not saying, just to be completely frank, I am not saying there are no plots happening. I'm not saying that there are no conspiracies. Like, that's the thing that's so fucking ridiculous about all of this, is that there are things like Jeff Epstein, and we're learning right now in the trial from what's her name, his second in command, that there are very powerful people connected to Jeff Epstein and his horrifying, basically sex trafficking incorporated. So it's not saying that these things aren't real, but fascists never get to the actual truth. They get to the concept of the plot, but they don't look at the material reality. All right, so property number 8. Fascist societies rhetorically cast their enemies as at the same time too strong and too weak. On one hand, fascists play up the power of certain disfavored elites to encourage in their followers a sense of grievance and humiliation. On the other hand, fascist leaders point to the decadence of those elites as proof of their ultimate feebleness in the face of overwhelming popular will. So, how often do you hear about these college students that need safe spaces to be protected in, or they're just so sad and blah blah blah, while simultaneously hearing that these college students are members of a terrorist cell of Antifa, being paid off by somebody like George Soros. And just to point this out, George Soros is a fucking capitalist. He's not a socialist. But anyways, the point is that there is an obsession with the enemy being too strong and too weak simultaneously. It doesn't make sense, but that doesn't matter to the fascist worldview. So, number 9, this is pacifism is trafficking with the enemy because life is permanent warfare. So there must always be an enemy to fight. Both fascist Germany under Hitler and Italy under Mussolini worked first to organize and clean up their respective countries and then build the war machines that later intended to and did use, despite Germany being under restrictions of the Versailles Treaty to not build a military force. The principles leads to a fundamental contradiction within fascism, the incompatibility of ultimate triumph with perpetual war. Notice, I'm on Donald Trump's god-awful email list, and there's an obsession with rhinos, R-I-N-O, which is Republicans in name only. This is people like Liz Cheney. There's hints to Mitt Romney, but the point is that they are now equating right-wing conservatives, people who are actually very bad people. Just to say this, Liz Cheney is not a friend. She is a danger and a problem. But because she dared critique the Trump administration's claim that the election was stolen, she is now being perceived as an enemy. And this is part of the continuous and permanent warfare. It's cultural warfare. Look at the right's obsession with things like Mr. Potato Head, who is still named Mr. Potato Head, along with Mrs. Potato Head. The company just changed its name to Potato Head because it's a marketing decision, and they're going to make more money eventually because they'll have more potato heads to sell. Like, for fuck's sake, this isn't a woke decision. It's a profit decision. But anyways, there's always an enemy to fight in fascist ideological processing. So property number 10, this is contempt for the weak, which is uncomfortably married to chauvinistic popular elitism, in which every member of society is superior to outsiders by virtue of belonging to the in-group. Eco sees in these attitudes the root of a deep tension in the fundamentally hierarchical structure of fascist polities, as they encourage leaders to despise their underlings up to the ultimate leader who holds the whole country in contempt for having allowed him to overtake it by force. Little dramatic, but I mean, listen, like, Donald Trump does not respect his constituents. He does not respect his own family. He is at the top. He has contempt. It's obvious. Okay. Property number 11. Everybody is educated to become a hero, which leads to embrace the embrace of a cult of death. As Eco observes, the fascist hero is impatient to die. In his impatience, he more frequently sends other people to death. This one I haven't seen as much with the Trump era, but it's not that it's not there. I will say that in a certain historical sense, the concept of death has become more taboo as we've enhanced medical science and our hygiene has gone up. Our cleanliness, we don't really want to go to war the same way that we may have, just because our weaponry has gotten so powerful that post World War I that it's an actual existential threat. It's in there, but it's just not this extreme. So property 12, machismo, and this sublimates the difficult work of permanent war and heroism into the sexual sphere. Fascists thus hold both disdain for women and intolerance and condemnation of non-standard sexual habits, from chastity to homosexuality. I mean, the Proud Boys, they self-identify as Western chauvinists. But to add on to it, I mean, how much disdain is given to politicians such as AOC or Hillary Clinton, or, Hillary Clinton, for fuck's sake. Somebody who I actually really can't stand due to her war policies. But it's pretty obvious that there's just disdain for Hillary from her gender and her sex, and there's just an extreme amount of toxic masculinity within fascism. So number 13, property 13, which is selective populism. So the people, conceived monolithically, have a common will distinct from and superior to the viewpoint of any individual. As no mass of people can ever be truly unanimous, the leader holds himself out as the interpreter of the popular will, though truly he dictates it. Fascists use this concept to delegitimize democratic institutions they accuse of no longer representing the voice of the people. That is what this entire election fraud thing is. Donald Trump lost the vote. He lost the popular vote. He lost the popular vote both elections. And he lost the electoral vote in the second election. I voted for Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden, and I don't support either of them in a lot of very, very meaningful ways. But it was an actual choice to vote for a candidate. It was a utilitarian choice. It was like, okay, I don't want to support a lot of these awful, inhumane, warmongering politicians. And they both have some pretty heinous track records regarding the treatment of BIPOC individuals, as well as the LGBTQIA plus community. But I still voted for them because, in a utilitarian outlook, they were going to pose a much less destructive force, much less destructive energy than Donald Trump. So, I saw a quote once where it was, it was like, what was it, 80 million people that voted for Biden. I might have made that number up, but anyways, the point is that I saw somebody wrote on a Facebook comment once where it was like, yeah, I don't believe that number is accurate at all of people who supported Joe Biden. Now, that many people who see Donald Trump as a danger and a threat, yeah, I can buy that one. But it doesn't matter, because the entire fascist model is to have a selective view of populism and to have a monolithic view of people. How often do you hear somebody just generally say the left, the left does this? Ben Shapiro's infamous for this. There's no nuance to the discussion. There's no, there's blatant just mislabeling. Calling somebody like Angela Davis a liberal, or calling someone like Joe Biden a socialist, is just completely out of touch with what individuals actually feel. And there's a complex world out there. I know a lot of left-wing people that own guns. I know a lot of right-wing people that are pro-LGBTQ. The point is that people are complicated, and there are a lot of nuances to it, but that doesn't matter, because that does not serve the fascist ideology. And finally, the fourth property is newspeak. Fascism employs and promotes an impoverished vocabulary in order to limit critical reasoning. Hey, now, the thing that is so absurd is there's always talk about political correctness, how it's policing language, and I just don't see it that way. Because newspeak would be to delete words and oversimplify things, whereas political correctness is expanding nuance. It is adding terminology. It is adding things. Now, it doesn't mean that it's always the right choice, and it doesn't mean everybody's going to follow it or accept it, or I'm just talking straight up objectively. It doesn't mean any of that. But it's not newspeak. Newspeak is impoverishing the vocabulary so that critical reasoning gets taken away, whereas political correctness is adding language. Just to give this, a sort of general way to understand the difference between a hate crime and terrorist is, a hate crime is somebody in a higher social sphere committing a crime, a politically oriented crime, whether it be through race, ethnicity, gender, orientation, economic class, but it's somebody in a higher sphere projecting downward, whereas a terrorist attack, terrorism, I would say, is really somebody from a lower class using violence against a higher class. Does not mean I support either of them, but it's just there's more nuance to it. And so, anyways, politically correct language is not newspeak, no matter how much the fascists are going to want you to think that it is. And the last thing I'm gonna look up is Blood on My Hands, Blood in My Eye by George Jackson. So George Jackson was really, really, really amazing author, activist, and convicted person who was incarcerated. He had been involved with revolutionary activity and was co-founder of the Marxist-Leninist Black Guerrilla family. He was charged. He went to prison for armed robbery. He stole $70 at gunpoint at a gas station, and was sentenced to 1 year to life in prison. He was just in for a long motherfucking time, and it's ridiculous. But anyways, while he was there, he really got more and more involved with reading Marxism and reading Maoism, and getting into Engels and Trotsky and Lenin. Anyways, all of this to say, he wrote a really amazing book while he was in prison called Blood in My Eye. And Blood in My Eye is really his breakdown of fascism in the United States. And he really breaks it down into 3 different areas, and it's pre-fascism, so fascism growing energy. It is then power grabbing fascism, and I'm making these terms up slightly, but that is when fascism has actually come to some sort of power, and then there is total fascism, which is complete control. The biggest thing is he actually defines the United States as total fascist. And keep in mind, this is, for people who are having a knee-jerk response, realize he is speaking specifically about lower class, lower income people of color, which I think it could be argued very clearly that if you are a person of color from a poor background, you live in a fascist country. You can steal $70 and get sentenced to life in prison. That's totalitarian, y'all. Like, it just is. Yeah, so cool. I know I'm doing these solo things. Last week I talked about depression, but I wanted to just get some basic definitions down on what fascism is and why I think it's important. And if you think I spent too much time on Donald Trump, I don't really care if you think that, because honestly, he and his entire movement that he's really building is an existential threat to the world. We have a serious issue of climate change, and we're in the middle of a worldwide pandemic, and this fucking loser can't get over the fact that he lost an election, and so he's going to do everything he can to get a sense of satisfaction. Yeah, and he's just, he's full of shit. And honestly, I don't even care. I'm friends with a lot of people who support Trump, and I will hang out with people who support Trump. And, I even consider some conservative folks and some Trump folks to be friends. But I still think that the belief system is full of shit. And I think they're full of shit. And I think I'm allowed to say that. I think it's a really, really ignorant and selfish way of looking at the world. Being so obsessed with the concept of hierarchy. And doing anything possible to maintain that hierarchy. Any means necessary. And it's gross. It's really gross. So, anyways, thank you all for listening. My name is Dorian Wallace, and this is Dorian's Mode, and I'll catch y'all next week. Peace. Consider being a supporter of the show. I'm involved with a musicians co-op called Ampled. Ampled is a Patreon-like platform for musicians collectively owned by its artists and workers. Ampled empowers artists to receive direct community support without intermediaries or gatekeepers. You can become a supporter for whatever amount you think the show is worth. Supporters gain access to exclusive content, including work-in-progress recordings, backstage events, and sneak peeks at upcoming projects. The average supporter gives $6.50 a month. Check out my weekly Twitch show, Socialist Psychedelia Music Hour, which streams every Wednesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at www.twitch.tv/Dorian Wallace. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. On YouTube, please like and subscribe. For more information regarding my compositional or therapeutic work, please visit my websites at www.dorianwallace.com and www.maderimusic.com. Let's all keep growing the human-to-human experience. My name is Dorian Wallace. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. Peace.